Okay, so this morning we've invited speakers from Mingle Connections with Moet, Hennessey UK, Hook Research with BBC Radio, or rather BBC Sounds, I should say, Buzzback with TherapeuticsMD. So these are the speakers today. So the first presentation is from Morgan Arnold, Director of Mingle Connections, and Beatrice Leung, Insights Manager at Moet, Hennessey UK. And it's called Igniting Consumer Centricity, giving an organization the Mingle Tingle. There's always room for a tingle in life.
Indeed.
Morgan has 25 years of experience in the insight industry, predominantly on the client side, and she reluctantly calls himself, a veteran, having held insights and innovation roles for P&G, Pfizer, Boots, Kimberly-Clark, J&J, and Allied Domecq. He's experienced the transformative effect of good insight on a range of brands, from pharmaceuticals to booze to nappies. Mingle was launched 2 years ago after observing that consumer closeness was always on an insight team's to-do list. B. Lung has spent nearly 30 years within Moet Hennessey, the wine and spirits division of LMVH, currently heading the category management and consumer insight division with a passion to constantly bring the consumer to the decision table and continuously looking for innovative and engaging ways to do so. So what are you going to hear? Mingle and Moet Hennessey UK created a successful online consumer closeness experience for 140 employees and 30 consumers simultaneously, delivering actionable insight on a strategic hot topic and sparking energy and enthusiasm for the whole idea of direct employee-consumer connection. This has made consumer closeness a desired and important element of the company's insight toolkit, and it's a major step in the cultural shift to make the entire organization more consumer-centric. Sounds good. So before I hand over to Beatrice and Morgan, I'll ask you to put your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, usual practice, and I'll put the questions to the speakers at the end of the presentation. Again, a reminder, there will also be a poll at the hour to capture a rating for each presentation, so do keep that in mind throughout the process. This session, beg pardon. So it's now time for me to hand over to Morgan and B and put myself on mute.
Fantastic.
Morgan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Thanks for the intro. Before I hand over to B in a minute to talk about the work that we did with her and Moet Hennessey, taking 140 of their team through a consumer connection experience, I guess we ought to sort of, I suppose, introduce sort of what Mingle is. So yeah, Mingle is a consumer connections company. And by that, we mean we run projects that directly connect you, the employees of a business, and decision makers in companies with real consumers. So, you know, no one-way mirrors, no using moderators to have discussions for you. It's about giving you and your employees direct connection experiences with your consumers. And before we get into the projects, maybe just give you a bit of a feel as to why we do what we do. We believe there's an empathy deficit. So, you know, we've worked in market research all our careers, mainly with large sort of multinationals. And we observed that sort of no business we've ever worked in or with has ever complained of having too little data. But quite a lot of businesses we've worked in or worked with felt that they weren't great at being truly consumer centric. And it's even worse today, I think, in a world of advanced analytics and highly specialized research agencies that can use sort of funky techniques to uncover hidden needs and consumer motivations. We believe many businesses have kind of lost sight of simply spending time with their consumers or their customers. And we're by no means sort of saying that data collection and cool qual techniques aren't important. They absolutely are. But if you don't make time to get out there yourselves into your consumers' world to speak to them and see them with your own eyes, you run the risk of developing what we call an empathy deficit. And this is where consumer connection comes in. So, and again, we strongly believe that making time to get out there and engage directly with consumers is a vital tool and a kind of a vital complement to the other research and knowledge sources you have. And making the effort to directly connect with consumers builds empathy. And the point we want to make here is it sort of builds the right and most powerful kind of empathy. Reading about your consumers or attending a research debrief is important. You know, don't get us wrong. It still builds understanding and empathy, but it often gets called effective empathy. There is, however, or we think about a different type of empathy cognitive empathy. So this is the understanding you get through doing and experiencing, through sort of living and breathing. It's the type of empathy you get by taking on the responsibility yourself to step into the consumer's world with them, even if it's just by having a conversation with them. So building empathy in this way also has kind of a bigger impact on you and is more likely to influence your decision making. And then the last sort of why, I suppose, is, you know, this finding from I think a 2018 HBR study says it all. You know, they basically found companies that were doing this and were making time for consumer connection and getting out there and incorporating it into their brand development and planning processes were more successful than ones that weren't, basically. Like anything, we have an approach. So we would never actually say getting out and meeting consumers is a bad thing just to do ad hoc, but we want to give it some structure because we think that that's the way to do it effectively. So every project we do, and when B comes on to talk about the Moet projects, we use this process with them as well. But everything we do is sort of guided by our 4 C's process. And again, just to quickly headline it, the first C is clarify. So being clear on kind of what you want to achieve, what is the change that you want to affect in the organization, but also what is it that you want to focus on? Because even though getting out and spending time with consumers is good, we always think it's very important to have a single-minded knowledge objective and something that will focus your thinking to hopefully have a big impact on the business. The second objective is getting out. The second C, sorry, is getting out there and connecting, and this can take a myriad of forms. You know, your creativity is boundless here. We've had people, you know, holding babies at coffee mornings, stacking shelves in stores, working in old people's homes. There's a myriad of ways. Obviously, in the last 15 months or so, this has been very virtual, and we were a bit skeptical of how well it would work virtually, but we've moved a lot of our business and all our work online now, and it's working extremely well. There's tools like the ones we're on today, but equally there are still a myriad of other sort of virtual tools. We've done WhatsApp connections, etc. There are lots of tools and technology out there that allow you to have these connection experiences even in the virtual world. Then the last 2 C's are consolidate and crystallize, and these we think are absolutely key. So this is about consolidation, is about when you've been out and connected, and usually it's a very small scale qual exercise. You might only be speaking to 2 or 3 consumers as yourself, but actually you'll usually do this in a bigger team. So making time to get back and share what you've learned amongst you and your teams is absolutely key. And then crystallize is about then applying sort of insight generation techniques and data interrogation techniques that often we as Mingle help facilitate to really get under the skin of what you've learned and turn it into something sort of insightful and impactful for the business. So getting on to the approach with Moet Hennessey, let me hand over to B to take you through the projects.
Thank you, Morgan, and good morning all. So the first part, there was really a cultural objective because the business was embarking on a new consumer centricity journey, and there was the need to showcase that this was important beyond the consumer engagement team for the whole business. Hence the idea to get everybody in the company, 140 employees, involved in the consumer connection and give everyone the Mingle tingle. But we also needed a business objective, and it was really important for us. And we focus on a strategic drinking occasion with the idea really to discover how this occasion was relevant to more premium drinks and how our brands would connect with consumers in this occasion.
Excellent. And again, just to revisit, you know, Bill come and talk about some of the output, but just to revisit the 4 C's, we got this brief from B, and it wasn't, it sort of slightly put us back to start with, because it's about getting 140 of her team out meeting consumers at one point, at one time, as part of a virtual company conference. So it was by no means an easy brief. And again, the way we approached it was to use the 4 C's. First of all, the clarify phase, as well as getting into the objectives and her business objectives and what they want to achieve, we actually took the decision to build some consumer connection champions. So about, there's about 25, 28 in total that we actually pre-briefed and trained as the people that were going to lead the rest of the organization through this exercise. So we trained them, we gave them discussion guides, we trained them on the objective, we trained them on interviewing techniques and how to get the most out of consumers. And we assigned each of those leaders to one of 14 groups. In the connect phase, then, it was really about finding the right technology. And we ended up working with a brilliant company called Brainstalk, who effectively have a sort of an online qual platform. But it's very simple, but it's very, very high quality. And what that allowed us to do was create 14 simultaneous rooms that all ran at the same time, and everyone could get into very simply with very little training or expertise, get into. And in those 14 rooms, 2 Moet employees met with a couple of consumers who were friendship pairs. So they were discussing this drinking occasion. And then the further about 8 or so Moet employees were in a back room where they had an active listening brief and also could interact with the front room by asking questions, etc. So although there were 2 sort of Moet employees leading the conversation, the technology allowed a very interactive sort of environment for all 10 Moet employees to also interact with consumers. The consolidate phase then happened literally the next day. So straight after the evening conference session when they connected, we got them back the next morning. And again, in their teams, spent a very short session downloading everything they learned. And we gave them some very simple templates to capture their knowledge and start the process of understanding what it was they learned and what was important. We as Mingle then took that away and started to work it up a bit and started to work it into some themes of understanding and some sort of manifestations of the different occasions that they wanted to explore, and then took that back actually to the connection leaders. So the team of about sort of 15 or so people that were leading the connections at Moet, and ran a workshop with them to push it further, to get under the skin of it and turn it into something that was hopefully impactful and insightful for the business. And I'll hand back to Bea, and she can give you a quick flavour of what the output looked like.
Thank you. So through the crystallization and the work then with the Mingle team did, we had really very 9 single-minded manifestations of our drinking occasion relevant for premium alcohol. And I think what was really useful as well is that behind each of these 9 manifestations, we had really lots of rich detail in terms of where he was, who was there, how often did this happen. We could understand the role of a drink and the influences of choice, so the brand fit, etc. And also then what were the opportunities for Moet Hennessey. And as Morgan explained at the crystallization session with the working group, we did this mapping, which really helped us to understand the priorities in terms of these 9 manifestations. So we rank them depending on the potential from a consumer impact and then from an Image UK interest. So as you can see, there was a top cluster which felt most relevant, more higher energy, wider applicability. The middle cluster needed more of an enabler, and then the game night, which was felt less relevant for us. So overall, the feedback was very positive. And I think because it brought something to everyone, for people who are not so involved in consumer insight, that really, they really were delighted to hear or speak to consumers about the topical business issues. And for sales and marketing, that really helped to bring this brand closeness. And now I hand over to Morgan to conclude.
Fantastic, Bea. And again, I think just touching on this feedback, we were blown away by the positivity. And I think maybe one thing I didn't mention at the top is obviously that 140 employees covered a myriad of departments. It wasn't just sort of the marketing or insight teams, it was your trade teams, etc. And I think to have such consistent feedback from people that weren't necessarily always sort of as consumer centric maybe in their roles was really, really positive. So finally, the last 1 minute, I think, what should you sort of take away? So Consumers Connection is a great tool to build cognitive empathy. And again, thinking about this empathy and the cognitive empathy we think is really cool. And it just doesn't have to be sort of sexy or highbrow or kind of be sort of wrapped up in sort of high-end research techniques to be impactful. Consumer connection is really simple to do, and we strongly believe that we need to be doing more of it and have it in our insight toolkit. And it's very low-hanging fruit. It's sort of something that actually you can get your teams doing very quickly and very cost effectively, but it has the ability to really inspire and engage broad organizations and really bring the consumer into your organization. And then finally, you know, that there is this positivity about it. We do talk about the mingle tingle. It's the feeling that people get after investing some time and getting out there and chatting to consumers. Really does have quite a visceral impact on people, and it's great that impact and that positivity is something that can really be owned by insight teams. It's an initiative that you can stamp your name on and be recognized for. So thank you very much for listening. Our challenge to you is, how will you get the mingle tingle in your organization? And I'll go back to Tom for questions.
Well, I've certainly got the mingle tingle. It's great listening to you this morning. Thank you very much for that. I mean, curiously, there are no questions. The question cabinet is bare. So I've got a couple here, which I'll put to you for me. Did you uncover any naysayers amongst the 140? And if so, how did you set about winning them over?
Do you want to lead off on that, B? I mean, I've got some feelings, but
Sorry, could you kindly repeat? Did we
any negativity or naysayers amongst the people participating?
No. Honestly, it was one of the best rated part of the company conference, and there were very, very, very few negative. I mean, you know, you always get, I suppose, the expectation that some people meet consumers and they were not exactly the people they were expecting to meet, this type of thing. But really, that was very, I think that was really very, very enjoyed by people, and it was quite, it was good, very good.
I think I think generally one of the pushbacks we often get is the time element, and actually that's where technology has massively helped us. So one pushback often you get, or the naysayers, like, oh, you know, I can't give up an afternoon to go and visit someone in home or go and walk around a store with somebody. I've got meetings. So firstly, we think, you know, that highlights a bit of an issue in an organization, but secondly, actually doing it online and doing it using sort of virtual tools can actually make it reasonably very, very, very efficient for people. So hopefully, again, the way we structure both the connection itself and then the follow-up stuff when we're doing sort of consolidation and crystallization, we try and make it very easy for everybody to engage with and feel like it's quite light touch.
Excellent. Okay, a couple of questions have popped in, which is great. What I'm going to ask you, if you could stop sharing your screen, I'm going to ask Sam to share his screen so we're poised for the next one whilst I ask these final questions here. From an anonymous attendee, here we go. Have you followed up to size the market for the occasions?
Oh, very, very, very good question. Yes, and then this is going to be followed with obviously a consumer segmentation. So yes, absolutely. I think the beauty of this exercise is that, you know, it's like the first toe in the water, and then, you know, we can launch into something more quantitative or bigger. So yes, in the process.
Excellent. Okay. And there's a question from Viv. Good morning, Viv. I hope you're well. Great session. Thank you. Just wondered about the range of customers involved. A wide range from Moet loyalists through to prospects, ?
Yes, so I think that was the other challenge we had, is that obviously we have a broad portfolio of champagne, wine, and spirits. So that's why we took an occasion which, you know, enable consumers to go through wine, spirits, or champagne. So we tried to cover a broad range, and not really to be too focused, so that it can really engage everybody in the company.
Excellent.
And again, I'd say, Tom, that's a really nice thing about sort of the virtual world, is that doing things geographically more broadly is far easier. So we're doing a lot of global work now that probably logistically would have been more challenging in the physical world, but tapping into tools to do stuff virtually is really opening up the breadth of, I guess, experiences you can have.
Fabulous. What a positive note to end on. Super stuff. Great. Enjoy listening to B. I can listen to your accent all day long. It brings a tingle to the audience, I'm sure. Thank you very much, both Morgan and B, for the first presentation. We're going to move on to the second presentation now. It's called Changing the Way the BBC Thinks About Discovering Music. It's up there on the screen in front of you. And it's from Sam Harris of Hook Research and Johnny Kanagasuriam of BBC Sounds. So Sam is the Insights and Engagement Director of Hook, previously coming from a background of research, tech and marketing. And he uses this experience to design research and strategy sessions that help brands understand how to best operate in the modern media landscape, leveraging the plethora of products and platforms they now have at their disposal to build powerful connections with their audiences. And Johnny is responsible for the content strategy across speech and music in BBC Sounds, working closely with commissioners across BBC radio networks and content teams across the BBC's portfolio. His focus is on insight-driven commissioning and delivering a content pipeline that drives growth whilst being relevant for all audiences. So music consumption is shifting away from chart-driven listening to more curated experiences, and new platforms from SoundCloud and Twitch to games like Fortnite are changing the ways young listeners discover and engage with artists. So Hook and BBC Radio will tell us how their findings have revolutionized the way the broadcaster thinks about music discovery moving forward. So there are plenty of opportunities in the modern media landscape, but it's a complicated and swiftly evolving environment. Again, I'll remind you, please put your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and don't forget the poll. Over to you, Johnny and Sam.
Thanks, Tom. What a great introduction. I feel like you've really teed us up well for that. So my name is Sam. As Tom said, I'm the Insights Engagement Director over at Hook. Hook is an audience insight agency. We deliver consumer research, content development, brand strategy to brands across the UK and around the world as well. And today I thought it'd be interesting to talk about a recent piece of work we did with BBC, exploring how different audiences approach discovering new music. It's a piece of work that we're particularly proud of. It was highly commended at last year's AQR Qualitative Excellence Awards. And I thought it'd be useful to go through, with Johnny, how we set up the work, what we found out, and the impact that's had within the BBC. Johnny, do you want to give a bit of an introduction about yourself? I know Tom's kind of given a bit, but anything else to add?
Not really. I think he covered most of it. I think he covered most of it. That's fine, Sam. You go on.
I will crack on then. So just to kind of give us a bit of a background as to where we were coming from with this piece of research. Obviously, the modern music landscape is a very dynamic and exciting space. This brings with it a lot of opportunities, but it brings with it a lot of challenges at the same time. Just some of those things, you have the myriad touch points that audiences now have with their favorite brands. They can engage with the content these brands are delivering through social, through linear, through digital, through native platforms. You have all of these different ways for brands to engage, and they just need to be accounted for in brand strategies. You have new publishers entering the market as well, kind of creating new tools, leveraging new platforms, owning new niches that are really changing the way that brands can interact with different listeners. There's a diversification of needs that's going on with audiences as well. We live in an on-demand media environment, and audiences are getting used to these bespoke experiences. So what does that mean for brands when they are creating different packages of music or different products to help audiences engage with music? And obviously there's the role of influencers as well. Social media has unlocked the ability for audiences to engage with their favorite celebrities wherever they are in the world. And that is having an impact on the different ways that younger audiences in particular are surfacing music. So within all of this context, the question was raised by the BBC, now, as a PSB, how can we best fuel discovery among modern audiences? And specifically as well, thinking about the content that kind of contextualizes this discovery, what are the types of things that can help different audiences engage with, sample and unearth an exciting array of new and interesting musicians? So to kind of approach this question, we brought a number of different things to the table. Recruitment, obviously a core part of any research project, but for this project, it was particularly important. Obviously, we worked through all of the regular things you put into a research screener, but we also had to account for things like platform usage, the amount of music that audiences were consuming across the week, the genres that they were listening to. All of these different things had to be accounted for. So we worked closely with the BBC to make sure that we were gaining a truly holistic picture of the kind of 16 to 34-year-old music audience set at the moment. So to begin with the primary research, we ran a music diary over 9 non-consecutive days, asking audiences to log via video diaries, because we felt that was the least obtrusive way of getting them to share these moments, getting them to log when they were engaging with different types of music. And we kept that quite broad just to understand how audiences were thinking about music in the moment. We followed that up with a online community where we probed a bit more explicitly on considered thoughts around music, music brands, and music discovery. Also did a bit of content testing in there to understand what resonated with different audiences. We then took some of those individuals into workshops, really digging here into the role of brands and authority in the music discovery space, where our audience is turning to when they want help surfacing new and exciting music. Simultaneously as well, we ran friendship quads. The social aspect of music is hugely important. We want to understand how music discovery happened within friendship groups. So they were a crucial part of the process. And then to kind of wrap up the primary research itself, we ran a semiotic analysis. We took all the music brands that had been mentioned across the research, and there are a lot of music brands that were mentioned across the research. And we mapped them out, trying to understand where BBC's brands fit within the landscape now and kind of where there were opportunities to grow in the future. For us, it was also important across the research to build in regular hypothesis generation sessions with the BBC. Obviously, the BBC have a huge amount of knowledge, and what we wanted to do with this project is build upon that knowledge, not replicate any of it. So it was important for us to make sure that at each stage of the research process, we were touching base with the BBC and making sure that what we were finding was kind of augmenting and amplifying their existing research, just to really create something actionable and useful at the end of the day. And design-led deliverables, this is a core part of us at Hook. We think that the best research is easily communicated across a company, and that was definitely true here, as this research was intended to be used by a range of different teams. So we packaged up our deliverables in different ways to appeal to different audiences. We did a regular debrief kind of in a design-led way, but also created some dynamic videos and some 2-pager summaries as well. But enough of the structure. What did we actually find out? Well, we found out lots of things. Thinking about modern listeners as a whole, particularly that kind of 16 to 34 audience that we were looking at, there were a number of things that really connected with us when we were going through the research. First of all, the idea that emotional and authentic content and talent is really important. This isn't necessarily something new. You see this across the media landscape, but particularly in music, it was something that was just reiterated again and again and again by audiences. Younger listeners are gravitating to musical content that feels emotionally charged, and they're excited by talent that kind of has this rawness, this authenticity, this expertise that they see kind of scattered across the landscape currently. The research also underscored the ubiquity of music in younger audiences' lives. It isn't just about popping a playlist on your phone and going through it. It's about engaging through music on social media. The whole Wellerman and sea shanty thing wouldn't have happened without TikTok. It's through their favorite films, like The Greatest Showman. It's popping on a beauty vlog on YouTube and hearing a song in the background and then chasing that down a rabbit hole. So music is everywhere, and this research really showed us just how embedded it was into young audiences' lives today. Interestingly as well, the research kind of surfaced a number of places where the traditional way of thinking about music categorization was breaking down a bit. Audiences don't necessarily like defining labels for themselves, younger audiences in particular. This kind of 16 to 34-year-old audience are listening to a wide range of genres at the moment, and we're a bit hesitant to kind of assign themselves labels. Obviously, genres are still a useful tool for navigating the music landscape. We're not saying it's entirely gone, but there's just this openness to kind of fiddling at the edges a bit. And they really like the idea of music that does dabble on the edges. The most famous example, I guess, would be Lil Nas's Old Town Road, combining kind of country music and hip hop at the same time, really breaking those barriers. And then also kind of finally, you have this idea of our research kind of finding out that the traditional models we might use to think about different music audiences should perhaps be a bit more questioned as well. In the past, you've kind of had a spectrum of thinking about different music audiences. On one hand, you have your mainstream audiences driven by the biggest kind of pop hits. And on the other, you kind of have your more specialist niche audiences who are all about finding that latest obscure artist, really digging down into the details around music and badging themselves with it. And what we were finding was that there's a number of behaviors really bleeding in between those kind of two types. Mainstream audiences were starting to exhibit more kind of niche specialist behaviors, going to sites like Boiler Room to sites like Genius to really embed themselves into music a bit more clearly. And in these kind of specialist and more niche listeners, you had them kind of turning more to mainstream music. You'd have them sampling the latest trance artists in the morning and then moving on to Dua Lipa at lunchtime. So you kind of have this intermingling and this mixture and this breaking down of the structures that have traditionally been associated with younger music audiences. And that really gave an opportunity, we felt, to really just rethink how the BBC and kind of, I guess, music brands in general think about targeting audiences. We suggested that instead of thinking about audiences kind of in terms of as big buckets of mainstream specialists, perhaps there's something around thinking about discovery modes, how the different types and different moments when audiences are turning to or just discovering new music. And we identified 6 different modes. I'll kind of quickly go through them here. These are the times when people are kind of bumping into these new music experiences. The first one was trend-led discovery, the idea of an individual kind of following, learning more about culture and through that discovering music almost incidentally. An example of this might be following the controversy around Lil Nas, his Nike sneakers, and through that coming to his song Montero. You know, you're learning more about the zeitgeist, and through that you're engaged with and discovering new music. Community-led discovery, music discovered through engagement with a community of consumers who have shared interests. A recent example might be hanging out with your friends who love Eurovision, and through that discovering James Newman's music. It's being a part of a community and through that discovering new music as well. Occasion. This is about, it's kind of more functional aspect of music, soundtracking my life in particular moments. It's when listeners are looking for music that puts them in a particular mood. So this might be a gym playlist. It might be popping on lo-fi beats to study to on YouTube. It might be putting on Radio 1 before you go for a night out, something we could potentially do now. It's all about these really functional aspects and then perhaps discovering music as a part of that mood setting. So those are the kind of more unconscious kind of discovery occasions. They're kind of things where you accidentally stumble upon new music. There are also kind of moments when audiences are more consciously looking to find new music to consume. The first one of those was inspiration-led. These are kind of loosely defined and trusted spaces where audiences might go to find new music. This might be turning to the sounds of the 90s with Fern Cotton on BBC Sounds. You know that she's going to be delivering you great 90s songs, but you also might have a few songs in there that you didn't necessarily know before. You also have augmentation-led discovery. This is kind of topping up your existing knowledge around a certain musical area, whether that's a band, an artist, or even a genre. This might be digging into a band's back catalog, or it might be, if you're a huge fan of pop, listening to Radio 1's Best New Pop with Molly King. You know pop really well. And you have this kind of package of music that's helping you better understand the new music that's being surfaced in this space. And then the last one is kind of curiosity-led discovery. This is kind of the comfortably uncomfortable consumers seeking out completely new musical experiences. This is your kind of Discover Weekly on Spotify. You kind of maybe know what to expect a bit, but it should be a completely new experience. Or perhaps it's turning to something like Radio 6. Again, you kind of know what to expect, but you don't necessarily know the types of music that's going to be surfaced for you there. So this is kind of in a nutshell. I know I've just absolutely blasted through that, but in a nutshell, this is kind of what we found in our research. And I thought I'd then hand over to Johnny to talk about how it was actually rolled out within the BBC itself. Johnny, do you mind taking it from here?
Sure thing, Sam. Thanks for that. Good to see the work after all this time. I mean, I think kind of since this work is commissioned, I've moved from working in the sort of audiences function of the BBC, the audience planning function, to working on the content editorial side of sounds, which has been quite an interesting transition because it's sort of shown the true value of the work. I think sort of in its sort of first instance in terms as a partner who works very closely with Hook to deliver the insight to all the relevant teams within sort of radio and music. And then today in my sort of role where, on an almost kind of hourly basis, I'm sort of thinking about discovery when we're sort of doing insight-driven commissioning for either speech or music in sounds, and that commissioning comes from across the radio networks. I mean, in truth, I think the BBC is a huge champion of new music and music that is not played anywhere else, and so we sort of naturally have a preset to kind of serve that curious need state, to stimulate, to kind of bring people music that they've never really heard before. We've got an amazing specialist output. these new modes of discovery really sort of hinted at kind of a whole tranche of music listeners who've sort of grown up on streaming, who we could sort of think about in terms of our sort of editorial development. And that was really important for us to consider as we sort of tool up for the next 10 years, especially with the launch of Sounds. I mean, I think kind of, you know, just quickly, like kind of working with Sam and Nick was sort of, you know, a bit of a joy. They're kind of music nerds and they kind of matched our passion and love. But like all good kind of research agencies, they were objective critics who sort of stopped us going down a BBC wormhole. So we worked together very closely to do lots of iterative development, create something that had tangible use for editorial teams, that used language that embedded into the world of program makers, that didn't feel like a static piece of research. It has to feel dynamic. It has to feel like something that you can jump off and make actual recommendations to your talent and to people who are like completely live and breathe creative. In terms of tangible outcomes, we took multiple iterations of this work to every network and music team in radio and music to get them across the findings and to have basically open discussions about how they could think differently around music discovery. You know, and that's not about sort of saying do something else. It's about evolving what they all do really well, whether that is sort of the radio, you know, the Radio 1 and 1 Extra music team who sort of make the playlist, or whether it's Alan Davey and the Radio 3 guys thinking about kind of the future of classical music. It's about evolving what they all do really well to sort of reach the next generation of music audiences. After we had done the sort of, I guess, kind of the hard graft of sort of meeting with all the people who've got skin in the game on music, it sort of led very naturally to a pretty robust sort of music discovery set of days for all the leaders across popular and classical music networks. Think about how we can sort of bring together live and on demand to serve audiences better and to serve these sort of, in particular, discovery modes that are more passive as opposed to active. So that was sort of the tangible outcome within my sort of old role. I think kind of then naturally, you know, I naturally use this work in my day to day. You know, I sort of live and breathe the sort of aspect of, you know, sort of discovery by stealth. I sort of fundamentally believe it's the way in which people sort of broaden their horizons when it comes to consuming music. You know, whether that is, you know, an algorithmic or human, in fact. So, and in fact, actually, I don't think it's just sort of true of music. I think it's true of speech as well. So I'm still a very passionate evangelist in the way that I sort of think about commissioning frameworks and briefs and think about ideas, think about how a piece of content would fit within the platform for Sound. So I think overall, the work was, you know, received well. It generated a lot of discussion. It was most importantly used to kind of change working processes around creative development. And I think really importantly, it changed some of the taxonomy around music commissioning and discovery for a range of teams in a way that sort of brought us in line with sort of the sort of new look BBC audio space, which is not just the radio networks, but the radio networks and Sounds working together to do insight-driven commissioning. Anyway, there you go. I've run through it at a pace, but I hope that was clear.
Thanks, Johnny. I mean, that's really, in a nutshell, that's where we are with that research. Obviously, if you have any questions about that, we can answer them now, or you can follow up with us on email or any of the socials.
Super, Johnny, Sam, thank you very much. It's great to see such a comprehensive, holistic piece, program of research for what is a national institution, of course, the BBC. Well delivered. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on. What I'm going to do is invite listeners to put any questions into the chat box. And Johnny, Sam, if you wouldn't mind responding to any questions that should go in there in typing form, unfortunately, rather than being able to vocalize them, that would be excellent, if you don't mind doing that.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you very much. Fascinating presentation. Thank you very much for sharing it with us this morning.
Thank you.
If I could ask you to stop share your screen, and over we go. All happens as if by magic. Up comes the next screen, hopefully from Rob.
Hopefully,
Rob, thank you very much. Okay, super. So we move seamlessly on to the third and final presentation of the morning, which is about women's journey through menopause, something that has a significant influence on the life of older women and that will affect 50% of the population, but it is rarely studied. So the presentation is called Transforming Your Patient Journey, a new agile approach, and it is presented by Rob Siebold, Research Director at Buzzback, and Julie Loving of TherapeuticsMD, who isn't actually with us in person today because Julie's in America, so we do actually have some film footage of her, so she's going to be here with us digitally. So Rob is another insight veteran with over 20 years of experience in global insights and research across innovation, market understanding and communications, both in the UK and in Australia. He joined Buzzback in 2012 and leads on healthcare, including TNS and Research International, now Kantar, and Questar, now part of PwC. Every agency seems to be transmogrifying into some new three-letter acronym these days. Julie also has 20+ years of insight experience across a diverse set of industries and categories. She's held the insights function has led the insights function for food at Kellogg's, General Mills, NutraSweet, household products, SC Johnson Wax, Entertainment Universal and OTC, Dr. Shaw's, McNeil Brands. Her healthcare experience includes GI, upper respiratory, pain, cardiovascular, mental health, and most recently, women's health. Bristol Myers Squibb, AstraZeneca, TherapeuticsMD, where she is now. So her work has spanned the globe, having lived and worked in China, Japan, the UK, and the US. So you're about to hear a proven patient journey approach, integrating quantitative with qualitative, easy for me to say, interactive techniques, mobile video and social listening for a 360-degree view to provide patient understanding. The approach includes elements of greater speed and cost effectiveness, as well as a creative blend of approaches to understand patients holistically in order to build a better patient experience. So again, put questions for Rob and Julie in the Q&A box. Some questions would be very welcome. Rob and Julie, Rob, sorry, I'm talking to an absent Julie. Rob, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, for that intro. And yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for sticking with it. Two great presentations there. Yeah, appreciate your time for the last 15 minutes or so. So yeah, just going to share with you our approach to how we approach unlocking patient journey. And now, even if you're not in healthcare, we're hoping that the content is of interest to you, because we've chosen to focus on women's journey through menopause. And so, you know, hopefully you either know a woman or you are a woman, and the content is of interest to you in that way. So apologies for Julie. Yeah, she's based in Florida, and she can't be with us, but I've included some videos, as Tom said.
Rob, just to say, although the connection was really sweet when we tested before the session, it's a little bit crackly at the moment. I don't know if you can move closer to your microphone, or if there's anything you can adjust.
Is that any better? Is that any better, Tom?
That is better. That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I will try not to move.
Okay, just please keep breathing.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Yeah, no worries. Okay, so in 15 minutes, obviously, we can only do sort of a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of our case study. And I've just got one slide to kind of give you an intro to who Buzzback are, if you don't know us. So we're a digital insights agency, so primarily mobile or online. We do a little bit offline too. Founded in 2000. This case study is a healthcare case study, and we work across healthcare and then OTC, and also do a lot of consumer work as well. So our main approach that you're going to see today in the case study is we blend qual and quant in the same study. We call it quali-quant, and it's basically yeah, sample sizes of quant, but then building in interactive techniques to get patients or consumers or doctors to articulate better, to using these visual engagement techniques to help them to tell their stories. We have this sort of human-centric approach that really just tries to understand people and their motivations and their experiences and their stories, and we use these techniques to unlock that. This blending of qual and quant then turns into what we are terming as sort of a time efficient approach, because essentially what you're able to do is collapse what might have been two study phases into one. I'll let our case study sort of demonstrate that rather than drive on. So to begin, I'll let Julie introduce, and pray that the technology works. I'll let Julie introduce why we focused on the menopause.
So the world is a really big place, right? And we know that a little over half the population are actually women, which means that half of the world at some point will go through menopause, which means that the other half of the world will be impacted somehow by her going through menopause. Women spend about a third of their time in menopause, which means that their partners, brothers, friends will be spending about a third of their life going through this journey with these women. Very often they're confused as to what's going on in their bodies. It may start out with a missed period or two, and she's thinking, well, wait a minute, I spent pretty much my entire life up to now trying not to get pregnant. So am I pregnant? No, I just missed a period. So there's a lot of confusion. You know, they talk about, you know, there's no menopause 101 book for what's going on in my body, but there's a lot of books out there on pregnancy and raising children and what happens when you get your period and becoming a woman. Every woman is extraordinarily different. No journey is the same. One person may only experience panic attacks as a symptom. The other one might experience full-on hot flashes, night sweats, all of that. If you live long enough to get to the stage where you start to experience menopause, you can't escape it. And what we like to say is apathy and lack of knowledge are the biggest competitors. You know, women might just say, well, this is just something I'm going through. Doctors may just say, just suck it up, buttercup. You know, in medical school in the US, they maybe spend 6 hours learning about menopause early on in their schooling. And by the time they get around to actually treating women with menopause, it could be 30 years later. So there's just a lot of lack of knowledge and apathy when it comes to this category, which is why we focused on it, because everybody's impacted.
Okay, yeah, thanks to Julie. I found that shocking that doctors in the US have maybe 6 hours of training on menopause. I'm sure it's not much different in the UK, and it's really, you know, just a really stark finding that I learned through this process. Okay, just to walk you through what we did in a little bit more detail. So we used this holistic approach that Tom mentioned, basically combined a social listening phase at the outset with then a blended quali-quant online survey. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then we integrated video diary submissions as well, because we wanted to hear from women about their experiences in their own voice. So first, a little bit on the social listening and the purposes that it served. So we did that at the outset, and it really was met 2 objectives for us. It was kind of to give us some real world context to guide the study and the questionnaire design to make sure we hadn't missed anything at the outset, and then it really helped to frame what we learned during the analysis phase, to then put that in the context of what women were saying out in the social sphere. And one of the key things it confirmed to us was the focus in women's conversations on the emotional and psychological needs that they had, especially in the UK, with much less conversation about, you know, some of the medical options available. And so we really knew to dial up the investigation of emotions in our study. Women were talking about, you know, negative impacts on their mental health of menopause, and then as well as, you know, resources for mental and emotional support that they either were finding or mostly were wishing that they could find. There was also a really key strand of conversations calling for the dispelling of taboos around menopause, particularly in the workplace. And this is something that's actually really risen in volume since we conducted the study last year, and just even last week you might have read about a survey that was commissioned by Standard Chartered Bank in the city to look at whether a lack of support for women going through menopause in the workplace was actually hampering equality of women in the city in taking on senior roles. So it's really an area that needs attention and is getting it now. We then moved on to the primary research, and that integrated basically a 300 quantitative sample with menopausal women spread across UK and Germany equally. We explored the 3 stages of menopause, which, if you don't know, are perimenopause, that's sort of the beginning of the transition, the menopause itself, which is the 12 months after period stop, and then it's the postmenopausal phase, which we looked at the 2 to 3 years after, and looking at those experiences. So when we do a journey work, we use an exploratory framework to understand the different dimensions of the journey, and you can see it there. So we tailored this to the menopause journey, and that's always what we do. You know, experiences and behaviors can be different in different contexts, and so we've applied this as well in other healthcare condition work, so rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, Crohn's disease, some of those sorts of things, but similar approaches are also applicable to consumer journeys, and we do that too. So here, the framework of experience, behaviors, and emotions and needs, we essentially unpacked that across those 3 stages of menopause, and as well as quantitative metrics, so usual attitudinal batteries, and understanding what's going on. We had a significant qual element to this quali-quant. So about 30% of our survey was given over to qualitative techniques, and you'll see some examples of this. So we used a journey mapping exercise, some online digital collaging to get at emotions around different phases of the menopause, and then diary elements, written and video, to capture experiences in women's own words and just add richness and color. So, obviously we can't share everything. So just to give you this kind of high level overview of some of the key themes that emerged across these 3 stages of menopause. So perimenopause, and this is a phase that's often filled with lots of confusion and surprise, and which then leads to lots of anxiety and concern amongst women, not knowing what's going on. But actually, it's not the same for all women, and some actually see it as a natural and positive step change in their life. But more often than not, it's filled with anxiety and confusion. Then menopause itself, that sees the intensifications of the physical symptoms, and there's also then more frequent seeking out of information and support. And lots of women find this very challenging, and in our emotional exploration, there are lots of darker feelings, such as depression and despair, sadly, that were being reported. But it does start to bring clarity for women, and it's a chance to then move forward in their lives. And then the post-menopause phase is really the start of a new chapter. Symptoms are decreasing, mental well-being improves, and it's generally sort of a step forward. But again, not for all, and for some, they get stuck in that negative cycle. And so that's one of the key takeaways. We need to understand that individual experience in journey work, as well as aggregating. So to take you through some of the quant learnings, just at a very high level. So in that experience part of the framework, one of the main things that really sort of jumped out to us was that this notion of why the physical symptoms, while they're heightened during the menopause phase itself, it's how those mood changes and the psychological impacts, they're really peaking in perimenopause, which ties into what we see in the social listening, and really sort of then speaks to how you would wish to want to support women in that phase. In terms of behaviors in relation to menopause, one of the key learnings here was the unmedicated nature of menopause treatment. So only a minority, 1 in 5 of women, were doing something like HRT or taking some kind of medication, whilst more than half were turning to lifestyle approaches to managing those symptoms. So sleep strategies, diet, exercise. And while some of that is through choice, it's not all through choice, but some of it is through lack of access to the right kinds of information and treatment options available. We also looked at the needs component of the framework. A lot of needs came through in the qualitative, but we're also able to measure in the quantitative part of the survey. So here, for example, we're looking at information search sources, and it was striking that how much of the information search was sort of informal or self-directed. So searching online or talking to family and friends, and there were actually very few trusted or official sources available to women that they could turn to for reliable information. And then in the emotions part of the framework, here we're showing some quantitative data, so measurement of self-reported feelings throughout the phases. And again, if you follow those lines, it really stands out how perimenopause is that peak of frustration and confusion, and how those lines then tail off, and how post-menopause you really see that feeling of release and feelings of freedom and grow. So this was quant, but really where we understood emotions was by using the qualitative elements of our study. So One of the key techniques was a journey mapping exercise. Here we got them to identify with a visual that represented their journey. You can see them at the top there. And they basically picked the one that resonated most with what their journey felt like. And then we got them to create a collage using an image set to help them to articulate what it felt like through the different phases of their journey. We then linked that with a retrospective diary to get even greater depth on their experiences at each stage of that journey. So what was really neat was, with 300 quantitative sample, we had 300 collages and experiences here. That's a lot of richness. It allowed us to then develop a segmentation of 5 generalized pathways that women had through menopause, broadly on this spectrum of a better, more optimistic experience on the left to a more a more negative experience of the downhill battle segment on the right. And what's critical here is that having that segmentation then allows us to link the 2 bits of the survey together, the qual and the quant. Just an example there of one of the few pieces of qual feedback from diary and collage from one of the segments, the women who take it in their stride, and you can kind of see the sort of level of richness that we're able to achieve. So yeah, that was one woman's data, and as I mentioned, we had 300. I won't go through all the segments because in the interests of time, there's another one that had a very different journey, so a rocky road, much more of a roller coaster experience. And then the third component was this video diary. So we asked each woman to tell us about their experience, and again, I won't play the video because we're limited with time today, but that added a real sort of flavor of richness to the survey. So hopefully I've kind of given you a flavor of how we're blending qual and quant to give us that really rich combined robustness but depth, and how we essentially did 2 phases of research in a 6-week period where otherwise it might have taken longer. And I'll allow Julie to wrap up with the last.
And so, I've been partnering with Buzzback almost since the beginning. When I was working at Universal Studios, and I have been partnering with you guys ever since. And what I love about this quali-quant technique, which is pretty unique actually to Buzzback, is that it really gives you very robust information, not only to understand what is happening, but why is it happening, right? And very often research will either report what is going on or the qual will report why. But to marry the 2 together and to put numbers behind it is especially rich. And this is especially in areas where people may feel confused or isolated, such as somebody that has asthma or menopause or depression. These are categories that people don't talk about a lot. So they may not know how to express themselves. They may not know, can they express themselves? And these techniques really, 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 really help to really uncover why are people feeling the way that they're feeling, and then gives us ideas in terms of how we support them in terms of materials that we develop and services that we can provide. So, it's I would say it's still a unique approach, but one that I find incredibly valuable, and that TXMD actually has embraced wholeheartedly.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for taking just a minute longer, I think, than our slot. Happy to take any questions either now in the chat or obviously afterwards if you want to get in touch.
Well, thank you, Rob. That's super. I see your details are up on screen there. So I'm going to invite Suzanne, one step ahead of me, to launch the poll so our listeners can complete the poll for us. Please do fill it in. It really does help us. That would be really useful. And I think questions, Rob, I'm afraid are going to have to come to you after the event through email, if that's okay, because we're rather out of time. I'll now simply do a wrap up. So thank you to you, Rob, and Julie, our digital guest, to Beatrice and to Morgan and to Sam and Johnny. It's been a pleasure having you with us this morning. The presentations are going to be up in the member section of the Aura website within the next 24 hours. Each of them is in the hands of Suzanne as we speak. So if you haven't done so already, I'll draw your attention to our next event, which is on the 30th of June on the topic of innovation. It's a bumper event running from 9 a.m. till 11 a.m. You will hear 6 presentations on the subject of innovation. The presentations are a shortlist selected from submissions we received following our invitation to enter this year's Aura Innovation Award. At the end of the session on the 30th of June, you'll have the opportunity to choose a winner. So it's a set of crackerjack presentations, so do please join us. We look forward to your company. We are now bang on the magic hour of 10 o'clock. I can see entries are going into the poll, which is fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll leave the screen up for a few more minutes, but in the meantime, I will say goodbye on behalf of Suzanne, and from me, and from the rest of the team here at Aura. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Have a good day.